Apriti sesamo. Hello, you all. Welcome to Mummenschanz 50 years beautiful exhibit in this wonderful museum here in St.Gallen. This is Broadway. Yes, 45th Street. Unfortunately, the theater, the Bijou Theater, doesn't exist anymore because they built a 300-room hotel instead and destroyed 4 different theaters. That's life. Here you have a sample of some of the best posters that were done for Mummenschanz. The most irresistible for me was the insect mask. This was shown in the subways in New York. At that period in '76, there was an exhibit in New York of Tutankhamun, and our agent, Arthur Schaffman, decided to make 100 exemplaries and then post them in the subways. And that's what filled the houses in Broadway. And this is the insect mask that Bernie used to perform. And here you have all our different collaborators that have worked, performers, backstage helpers, tour managers, administrators. I hope I remembered everybody, but everyone is deeply in my heart. Here we have a wonderful simulation of my atelier in Ausstellung. And that is the cow that we performed in Avanches for a musical show called Hopla. Andres had the idea we do a double backside of a cow, and it took me 2 months to find the right shape because I'm not really a cow specialist. So I was walking in Ausstellung looking for cows and studying how they looked, and finally I got the inspiration and glued it with foam rubber and Patix. Oops.
So welcome to the Mummenschanz exhibition. I first met Mummenschanz in 1979, and they came back from Broadway, and this first success inspired us in the museum to make this exhibition like it, as it looks like. So we have here a theater. We built a theater like in New York, one of the Art Deco theater, old theaters, and we have a bar and a foyer. And so you see here for the Jubilee, we made a special champagne.
So here it's again a simulation of my atelier in Ausstellung. Here you have a presentation of the different companies, Bernie, Andres, and myself, and then with our different collaborators. Kofi Annan wasn't a collaborator, but he honored us with his visit, and and here is the actual company nowadays who is performing. And this was one of the last shows that Bernie did 12 years ago already. And yeah, it was great to work with him. It was wonderful to be a trio. But now I'm very happy and very proud to work with these young performers who have great talent and are lovable. Yeah. This was a film done by Xavier Koller, the only Swiss who won an Oscar with another film, of course. And in the 70s, we did this film in a place where they draw the stones outside of Zurich. And it was a bit rudimentary, our masks, but it was a good success on Swiss television. This is done with special clay, and these are the original masks of Andres and Bernie with this special clay mix. They're very mellow when you transform them with your hands. These haven't been touched, that's why we protected them. Bernie did his own mask, and Kevin Blaser, my colleague who now performs the act that Andres used to perform, did this mask. And they weigh about 17 kilos at the end, which is quite heavy because they keep adding to become more and more monstrous. And at the end, it's quite heavy, but it's spectacular. And if you think this was the first sketch that Andres and Bernie invented in '69, so in '70 actually, and they performed it in front of department stores like Loeb in Bern, and then I would go around with my skirt and ask for money. That was something we had to try to live from, and it was quite successful. It's a sketch in which, with the rapidity, with the quickness of your hands, it's almost like words. It's almost like speaking. And you have to be very quick, and if the clay doesn't react properly, it doesn't work. Yeah. These are all Basler masks. Usually these rubeli are used to put on your head to hold another mask in front, that after it's decorated with plenty of hairs and feathers and colorful pieces. And Bernie had the idea to do with these electric tubes, these masks, a rabbit, a bird, a cat, a monkey, a nosy, and we performed it in the first show, Evolution. This is a chameleon mask that I wore on the side of my head, and I would hold myself on the ramp and then turn with one hand the eye to look, and then blow with a sifflet to catch the fly. Short and efficient. Our sketches are always between 1 minute and 4 minutes. I think the clay is about 4 minutes 50. It's one of the longest sketches that we perform. And that was our very first trunk that we traveled, that Andres and Bernie traveled in the ship with. They worked for Holland American Lines, performing in a small stage in a restaurant. It didn't last long. They got fired after 3 months because they had these crazy ideas like the clay, and people were kind of shocked. There is another sketch which is one of my favorite, which is the eating. It's 2 half masks, and they taste one another, and they find the flavor very spicy, very interesting, very good, and so they start taking pieces of one another with a fork and a knife, and at the end he is so full of what he has eaten from her that he goes away and he leaves her all by herself to eat her own mask in solitude.
Cannibalistic ritual.
Well, for me, it was one of the strongest numbers, let alone woman and man. You know, just eating one another is, I find, you know. But we can't perform it in big theaters, so I'm happy to present it in this wonderful exhibit. These are jerry can masks that we found in the streets of Paris, and we decided to embellish them with party blowers, with balloons that the eyes blow. So I was behind this mask, and then of course with the tongue I had to shift from one tube to the other. It was quite complicated, but somehow I managed. And this we performed also at the Muppet Show on television. And it's incredible how people still remember the Muppet Show presentation. Here we have the transfig. This was a specialty of Andres. Andres was the acrobat in the company. Of course, he's wearing one part on his head and one part, the other head is between his legs. And so it was the duality of which side is who is which side. Where does he stand? Where does he find his balance? Where does he find his logic? And he did a spectacular job with it. And now is Kevin performing it in our current 50-year jubileum show. And yeah, I love that sketch. This was in the 80s, in which we would we would perform above our heads the masks. It was a new technique we wanted to experiment with. Inside here, you have these masks that you wear on top of the head. And so it's interesting because you really develop a sensitivity in the tips of your fingers so that you feel, you recognize which shapes you are doing, which shapes you are performing. Because we never work in front of a mirror. We work in front of one another, and then we try to learn to feel, if not to see, with the tip of our fingers. This is one of the beloved sketches of Mummenschanz that we performed in Evolution in the 70s with toilet paper rolls. Now the problem is that there's Hackle has closed, so there's no more toilet paper. In the 70s, it was a spoken sketch between Andres and Bernie. Then when we decided to convert all the spoken numbers into mask play, then we did this love story, which was very romantic, very exaggerated. Andres performed, my colleague, and then he always wanted to take everything away from me, and he wanted more and more until I got fed up, and I did a bundle and threw it at him, and he started crying and crying and crying. And of course, for that crying, you need a very special toilet paper because it has to have a hard perforation so that it won't tear. And the problem with the toilet paper is to travel overseas, and when you go to America with European toilet paper, they always wonder why we dare to offend the American toilet paper. And then I try to explain that it's because of the perforation, that American toilet paper is very soft and gentle, and this one is a little bit harder. And it does our purpose. So they let the toilet paper come in. Here is one of the 19 72 sketches called the Notepads, and it was again a conflict situation between Andres and Bernie. Andres always wanted to be better than Bernie, and Bernie, of course, was minimalistic and very serious and down to the pinpoint. And yeah, it was absurd again, full of misunderstandings, but very humorous. And Bernie drew during the show different mouths. And here, for the museum, we have had the idea to do it with different eyes, so that people can do their own mask. It's interactivity is really Mummenschanz. So I think we did a wonderful job here in the museum to try and bring some of those moments. Here you have another interactive situation in which these are horse brushes, and this is a carpet that you use for the garden that I sprayed in black. And here you can do different eyes, different situations. Yeah. Ah, much better. Again with a horse brush. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. At first I wanted to do this in the intermission because I have another sketch in which I wear a cube with tape. I think we have it somewhere. Which I do currently for the 50 years, which is one of the most interactive sketches, because I go into the audience with a roll of tape, and I ask the audience to make me a face, and then I interact with them. And then at one point I said, let's try something new, something different. So we tried it with this, but as you see, you could see my face behind. It wasn't good. Then you always had to be like this, because otherwise everything would fall. It was very uncomfortable. So I kept to the cookie box and tape, much safer. Here, as the wire heads back there, was our 1989 exploit for the new show. We had just returned from Broadway. We took a sabbatical year in which we thought of how we want to continue. And then Bernie had the idea that it would be interesting to portray how we lose the head. We have become greedy, we have become impossible, we have become difficult, we don't communicate openly anymore, and so we lose our heads. And so we had to build this costume in which we could hide our heads, and our heads would become the neck, and the mask was worn on top. These are the hands that were built by Bernie. Beautiful sculpture. I would never be able to do it. I do other sculptures in foam rubber, but the hands was really a beautiful specialty of Bernie. And it's worn, the thumb is with this arm, the index is on your head, and then these three fingers are together with a piece of metal so you can control them. So you can count. It's very difficult. I mean, Mummenschanz looks so easy, but when it comes down to it, it's hours of rehearsal, days of sacrifice, months of despair, until you really get good at it, because less is more. And the human tendency is to want to add more and more and do lots of different things, but then you break it down and it comes to an essence that everyone can understand worldwide. When we were touring the United States, the Swiss television contacted us. They wanted to do a film of Mummenschanz when we would return to Switzerland, and so we had the idea to do a sort of Adam and Eve story in modern times called La Pomme. And it was wonderful because it was the first time we were creating other masks and using perhaps more mime, more mimicry. It was a very interesting exploit. This is the sketch which is the most copied from Mummenschanz. It's called The Slinky Man. I performed it till 10 years ago. Now I let my younger female colleagues perform it, and they do a wonderful job. This is also 17 kilos on your body. Yeah, it was an accident, this creation, because we were looking to hide our bodies so that we could wear these masks on top of our heads. And this was an exploit, and then we said, no, but this is something different. You don't want to put one different mask each time on this shape. This is a beautiful shape. So we started improvising and found that it could lose the torso, have very long legs. You could take it into a ring and do a kind of strange shape. And yes, it's one of the most copied sketches, unfortunately. But I guess it's so good that people want to see it more. But I will not describe what they do with it. Not worth. Okay, so, and Mummenschanz really is very lucky with the technicians we have, because they do very special lights, and this is one of the most difficult sketches because we are 3 people, one behind the other, and we create this character that we call the ballerina. And of course, you know, the tendency is to take the head and then put your head in it. So you're always in a very uncomfortable position, but you really have to look at so many things. The gestuality of the shape, the being in the light, and not pushing the other out of the light. So, yeah, it's, again, a lot of patience and tenderness among us.
All these big masks and huge masks, like the hands or the ballerina, which was played by 3 persons. So they all were invented in the 80s, when Mummenschanz could train in the Rote Fabrik in Zurich. That was a place 300 square meters, so they had much room to train, to perform. And all in all, they were on bigger stages. Like in the beginning, they were playing in St.Gallen at the Kellerbühne. That was a tiny little place. And in the 80s, they were on the big stages, huge stages. So they had invented these bigger figures and bigger masks.
This was also in the Evolution show. It was a dice game in which with the dices you would try and make different faces. And of course, again, it was maybe the beginning of wanting to see and feel what you were doing with the tips of your fingers. It was very difficult, especially for Andres, to be precise in this matter, but it was fun. This we still have in the show. It's the plush face. Now we added a nose to it, and it was one of the Stop AIDS campaign sketch. See, that wasn't supposed to happen, for instance. Andres. Yeah. And this was the most famous sketch that we did for the AIDS campaign. This is, of course, an American plug, but we had put condoms on the plugs themselves, so it was very explicit and easy to understand. At first, the Swiss television didn't want it. They found it too extreme. But then a couple of months later, they accepted it and realized that it was a very strong commercial. Here you have an exploit of Taormina Arte, in which Andres and Bernie didn't really feel like participating. Andres did come a few days, but then left, and I was there 3 months and auditioned with some young people that actually later came to work for Mummenschanz, and they were so good. And it was Faust, and it was the first time I realized that it's impossible for Mummenschanz to perform in a Mummenschanz language, in a Mummenschanz way, when the actor is acting. The text is in conflict with the visuality, and the tendency of us becoming decoration was too strong. So what we decided with Giancarlo Sbragia, who was directing the show, we decided that the actor speaks, Mummenschanz is still, and then Mummenschanz moves and the actor is still. And that worked very strongly. It was a very strong show, and at the end we had an enormous head which would blow, and Giovanni Colombo, who later worked with Mummenschanz, was walking on stilts, and he showed this wonderful 2,000-seat amphitheater in Taormina, this head, and people were just astonished of this visual impact. Yeah. And that was the dog with the eyes on his butt and the mouth between the knees. And that was performed by Pietro Montandon, who later worked with Mummenschanz for 7 years. This was very difficult to exhibit, but our colleague Nicole Klumsch did a wonderful job to try and pin it down. This was Bernie with a fish pole and this very thin material that is used for packaging that he cut very thinly. And in the Rote Fabrik in the 80s, when we created the second show after the sabbatical year, Bernie would do every day at least half an hour with this coriandolo. And it was almost nerve-wracking. It was like a meditation. So that, but not only, he was really studying how to be quick enough to do the shape of the eye, the nose, and the mouth, so that the audience could read that it was a face. And no one else, and we have had a lot of performers trying to do this, was able to do it. So this is a sketch that we currently have in the show. It's carton with different folds, Velcro, receiving fabric, and they do different shapes. It's again a work of precision because the light is half a meter bright, so you really have to keep at least half of it in the light and not bend with your head or come forward too much so that you see your hand. It's a work of precision, but they do a wonderful job, and I'm watching every night and ready to write notes. But they're getting very good at it.
So this is one of my favorites, the sticks, because it was invented in St. Gallen. Since 1998, the Mummenschanz Foundation was founded, and the headquarters is in the eastern part of Switzerland. So we have the opportunity to make this exhibition for the Jubilee, and yes, it tells the story of Mummenschanz in St. Gallen.
This sketch was, at first, I made it with a black plastic called UFO that I found in Italy, and we have a lot of inflatable costumes that unfortunately we didn't exhibit here in the museum because it was very difficult. But this was the first sketch I did with this UFO material. And then there were two black heads, kind of sad, and so I went back to Italy and found some pink and some blue. And in those days I was very lucky because a lot of these warehouses would give me a big roll as a gift. Now you have to buy 200 meters and it's expensive, but anyway. And then we created this story, which was a bit Bernie and me. I was, of course, the pink face and Bernie was the blue face. And when the air was blowing and making us meet and have an Eskimo kiss, and then the air all of a sudden went away, we were sad, and then we were trying to find the air to come to again towards one another, but no, the head went backwards. And so we started running after one another, which was quite complex and absurd, but we still perform it. I don't, but my colleagues do a wonderful job. Yeah. The Katsina Hopi dolls that they make, the American Indians, Hopi, make for children to acquaint them with the different gods there are. And so these are Swiss postal boxes from the 80s, and we were looking for some ping pong balls in order to create a mask, and a box which was on top of a closet fell down, opened up, and all the balls were in the atelier, which was fine. But then we noticed this shape, and with Bernie we said, "Hey Bernie, this looks like a Katsina doll." So we bought 4 of these boxes and then painted them in different colors, and I performed the yellow one, which was a rebel, which didn't want to play with the others. She wanted to be alone. She wanted to be the star. And so, yeah, it was funny. Children laughed a lot, I must say. This is a current sketch. It's called The Hoodies, and the 4 youngsters that perform it have different shapes in their hands which simulate telephones. So they're doing all the gestuality that one does daily, and but it's about the solitude of when you are communicating through this media. But then they start, there is one that comes in that has the biggest phone, and so out of jealousy they start observing, and they fall into a trap in which they transform their telephones into different other shapes until at the end they are doing an acrobatic dance all together. So it's about miscommunicating, but then finding a peaceful communication together. And it's one of the most successful acts in the 50-year jubileum show. This we call the tutu, and it's in a blue light. And the material I found in France, in some remote town in the north, that they sold this special fabric that is usually for marriage dresses, to give it a little more pompous aspect. And so I bought 50 meters of it. I spent maybe 200 euros. Then I got back to Switzerland, and then my colleagues in the Stiftung were saying, 200 euros, what do you need this for? And then I said, oh, just give me a chance. And so I sewed it with a girlfriend who came to visit me from Lausanne. We sewed it together, and then at first we wanted to do lions and horses and different animals. And then the more we worked on it, then with the company, because the important thing is to improvise with the company, with the youngsters, because they are very talented, they have their own worlds, their own fantasy, and so by working with it, we discovered that it was much stronger as an underwater world. And we also perform it in the 50 years, and it's very successful. And last but not last, the octopus. That's again, I think, at least a 15-kilo costume in which you hide your head with the arms, and then you have the legs, and he's rolling and twirling and rolling and making different shapes until he becomes a kind of flame. And of course the lighting plays a wonderful role with different colored gels, and we don't unfortunately do it in the show because it takes 15 minutes to get into the costume. So yeah, here maybe, Nicole, you wall in which you can make your face. Yeah, thank you so much.